All right, welcome everybody to our 2021 Legislative Priorities Briefing. My name is Mike Brickner. I am the Executive Director of the ACLU of Delaware. We're going to give a couple minutes of warm up and introductions as more folks are joining us, but I am joined tonight by some of the best and most talented civil libertarians in the first state. We have with us our Senior Policy Advocate, Shannon Griffin. We've got Dwayne Bensing, our staff attorney, Javon Rich, our policy advocate, and Melissa Bryson, our development director. You're going to be hearing more from each of them tonight as we talk about what's in store for 2021. So we're super excited for you to hear about our plans. You're going to get a little bit of an inside look at what the ACLU is going to be working on this year and how you can plug into our work, because we can't do our work without you. We need you to be our voice out in the community with your elected officials and to be with us in the fight for equality and equity and justice. 2020 was kind of a rough year. I think we were all kind of ready to kick it into the dustbin. 2021's already been tough. I don't want to skip over kind of the elephant in the room that we've had a tough few weeks of 2021 already. And of course, we're right in the middle of an impeachment. Many of you saw we at the ACLU came out in favor of impeachment, and we're in a really dangerous time in our country. But even in the scariest times, there is a lot of hope. As bad as 2020 was, we had a lot of successes. We won a historic settlement in our school funding lawsuit that is going to lead to millions of more dollars going to underserved children here in the first state. That is a huge win. We had publication of a groundbreaking report on our probation system that exposed how people would go back into prison for minor technical violations and their life could be ruined because of missing a probation officer hearing or having a dirty urine screen. And we also had the push for more accountability and reform of our law enforcement, which was another important part of 2020. And lastly, we voted in 2020. Even though we had a pandemic standing in our way, even though there were state legislators who were trying to make it harder in various states, we had record numbers of people who turned out to vote, including right here in Delaware. And so even in that tough time, we had a lot of successes. And so 2021 is going to be about us building on those successes. So we won this settlement for education funding. We're going to go back to the legislature and make sure they follow through on that promise and then some. And we're going to push for more changes to increase equity and increase justice in our education system. We exposed the issues with the probation system and called for more policing reform. Those are among many of the reforms that we're going to prioritize for justice reform that you're going to be hearing from Javon about tonight. And again, we had record numbers of people turning out to vote, but we know we can make the system easier and we know we can enfranchise more people. And so you're going to hear from Dwayne about how we're going to make it easier for people to vote. So we've got a lot of exciting work to talk about tonight, and I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I'm going to turn it on over to Shannon plans for education equity here in 2021. Go ahead, Shannon.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am the education, I handle education equity work for the ACLU Delaware as the senior policy advocate. And so we're going to just talk about some of the highlights of that work we plan on doing for this upcoming legislative session around school funding reform, the creation of an education ombudsperson office, the compliance of the 2018 school discipline reform law, and also referendum reform. So the school funding reform, as Mike alluded to, we have just won the historic funding litigation. And so we as an organization want to make sure that legislation that comes out of that is robust, that it's implemented with fidelity. And so we really view this certainly as a victory But this is the floor and not the ceiling to address longstanding funding inequities in our state. And so we want to ensure that the funding actually reaches the students. We intend to mobilize our communities around getting guaranteed full-day pre-K and kindergarten for our students, increase funding for students in poverty, K through third grade special education, and increase funding for non-English language learners. Funding academic support for students below grade level in reading and math. What we know is we need to aggressively address longstanding achievement gaps, and school closures due to COVID further exacerbates the problem. We're requiring that students would be able to receive one-on-one supports or small group instruction in school and out of school. And this will require additional resources as well. The creation of an education ombudsperson office. This was actually included in the funding settlement, but there were a lack of specifics. And so we really want to make sure that we shape that so that it is innovative and that we're allowing for an actual agency that would be funded to the tune of $1.5 to $2 million annually, and that the agency be independent of the state agencies. That there will be an office set up one in each county. And the purpose is really to address the individual students and families to help them resolve complaints concerning disparate or unjust disciplinary treatment, inequity access to school programs or resources, and also to provide advocacy and community organizing and leadership training for anyone interested. We also want this office to have authority to represent families during disciplinary hearings, IEP, or special education meetings for support services. Next, we also want to make sure that the 2018 School Discipline Reform Bill is implemented with fidelity. And the law actually requires that the State Department of Education publishes school level discipline data. And that data is to include information around why students are being suspended, so the types of things that they're being suspended for in school and out of school. The data is supposed to be disaggregated by race, gender, ethnicity, also low income, spec ed, special education as well. And then we're looking to support implementation of those discipline reform plans that schools need to undertake. The DOE has a responsibility to provide adequate supports to those schools. And we also want to make sure that schools have the resources and the tools to really make sure that they are incorporating those plans and that we're able to see some significant decline in overall school suspensions across the state. Last but not least, we also want to look at referendum reform. And the whole idea for that is that we want to be able to relieve the reliance on districts to raise additional funds locally. And so there is a separate track that's actually going on now as far as loss litigation that will require property taxes to be reevaluated. And if this is done properly, this could mean millions of dollars annually to school districts all across our state that desperately need the resources. And so that, in a nutshell, is some of our major funding litigation work that we want to do around education equity as a whole. Thank you for your time. And now I'm going to pass this on to our staff attorney, Dwayne Benzing, who will talk about our voting rights work. Dwayne?
Thanks, Shannon. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll be talking about some of our legislative priorities regarding voting rights this coming session. The three main priorities that we have are: one, no excuse absentee voting constitutional amendment, same day voter registration, and then thirdly, permanent vote by mail legislation. Starting off, no excuse absentee voting constitutional amendment is currently pending in the Delaware legislature. The sponsor is Representative Bentz. The issue here is that the Delaware Constitution unnecessarily limits which voters are eligible to vote absentee. So we need a constitutional amendment in Delaware so that we can expand access to voting. The ACLU strongly supports this constitutional amendment so that the General Assembly may further enact laws providing for broader access to vote by absentee ballot. The General Assembly should pass HB 15 because, first, we know that safe and secure absentee voting has existed for nearly 80 years in Delaware. Our elections officials know exactly how to ensure that every registered voter's ballot counts, whether it's cast in person or absentee. Second, just last year, when the General Assembly expanded access to absentee ballots in response to the COVID-19 crisis, nearly 160,000 voters participated via absentee ballot. In contrast, only around 24,000 voters participated via absentee ballot in 2016. In whole, the 2020 election saw over a 15% increase in voter participation as compared to 2016, showing that when we make voting easier, people participate. Next, the Delaware Supreme Court has ruled that the current rigid framework of Article 5, Section 4A, by expressly including certain classifications, impliedly excludes all other classifications. HB 15 corrects for that narrow interpretation and permits the General Assembly to do its job to ensure broad access to participation in our democracy. Finally, we support HB 15 because it aligns with the constitutional authority provided under Article 5, Section 1 of the Delaware Constitution, providing that the General Assembly may prescribe the means, methods, and instruments of voting. Our next, once we pass HB 15, it'll be important that we implement permanent vote-by-mail legislation, and that's our next legislative goal. We don't have any draft legislation yet, and Morgan, this is our next slide, sorry. But Representative Brady will be leading our permanent vote-by-mail legislation efforts. The benefits of no excuse absentee vote-by-mail are plentiful. First, the option will allow citizens to vote at home and take time to study the issue and ask questions. Next, increasing the number of absentee ballots cast decreases the number of people voting in person at polling locations, potentially avoiding the need for long lines and wait times on election day. The decrease of in-person voters on election day could result in needing fewer resources, that means money, to staff and support traditional polling places. Third, having the diversity of avenues for voting maximizes the chance that elections may endure despite whatever unexpected threat emerges, including, but not limited to, another pandemic as experienced during 2020 elections. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. We're asking the state to establish a solid absentee ballot framework by proactively educating all eligible voters about the option to cast an absentee ballot and make absentee ballot applications widely available and easily returnable. We want the state to provide prepaid returnable envelopes for absentee ballots and establish phone and online hotlines to assist eligible voters in completing their ballots, made available in the predominant languages spoken in Delaware. We also want to make sure that drop boxes are widely available for returning ballots, including permitting voters to return their ballots to their local precincts on election day. And finally, we want the state to notify a voter before rejecting any absentee ballot and provide voters the opportunity to timely correct any errors. Our third and final legislative priority this coming session is same-day registration. Next slide, Morgan. HB 25 is sponsored by Representative Dorsey Walker and Senator Parity. The issue here is that the current registration deadline is the fourth Saturday prior to the date of the election. Same-day registration eliminates the need for advanced registration by permitting an eligible voter to both register and cast a ballot at the same time on election day or during the early voting period. By combining registration and voting, same-day registration streamlines the voting process, eases the burden on voters, and increases voter participation. The ACLU strongly supports this legislation to increase voter participation because Delaware currently makes voters register 25 days before an election, one of the longest deadlines allowed by federal law. It's past time to modernize Delaware's voter registration system and remove unnecessary barriers to voting, like these arbitrary deadlines. States with same-day registration experience on average a 5% increase in voter participation and consistently have the highest participation in the country. For Delaware, this could mean an additional 22,000 voters. Same-day registration also increases the access of historically underrepresented groups. Think of transient populations who need to update their address more frequently, particularly students, young people, and low-income voters who are disproportionately voters of color, infrequent voters, and first-time voters. Currently, 21 other states permit some form of same-day registration. We'll be working with the General Assembly to make sure that it passes legislation that makes same-day registration available at all polling places at any time that voting happens, and permit same-day registrants access to a regular ballot, not a provisional one, and without any proof of residency that's not otherwise required in Delaware law. Now I'm going to turn the program over to Javon Rich, our policy advocate, to talk about our smart justice legislative priorities. Javon?
Good evening. Hi, Javon here. As a policy advocate, I work on the Campaign for Smart Justice, which has two goals: cut the incarcerated population by 50%, and two, combat racial disparities in the criminal justice system. While we have realized tremendous success over the past 2 years, there is much work to be done, especially regarding probation reform. While many leaders recognize a need for change, Delaware still remains the most incarcerating state in the Northeast corridor of the US. And our incarceration rates are actually higher than our neighboring states and most other states on the East Coast. So for this year, 2021, we are going to prioritize the following issues: fines, fees, and driver's license suspensions, sentencing reform, probation reform, police accountability and transparency reform, the Clean Slate Act, and the Public Health Credit Bill. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of those issues. Next slide, please. First, we are continuing our work to address fines, fees, and driver's license suspensions. Delaware criminalizes poverty, period. People who cannot pay fines and fees end up being subject to search and arrest at any time. Their driver's licenses are suspended, and they end up having to pay more fees to cancel warrants as well as reinstate their licenses. In 2017, almost 45,000 failure to pay warrants were issued for people who did not pay fines and fees. The solution to this problem is to, one, for the courts to consider a person's ability to pay before assessing fines and fees, and two, end the automatic suspension of driver's licenses and issuing warrants for arrest when someone is unable to pay. And we're really looking forward to collaborating with other community partners on all of our issues, but especially for this one, the Campaign to End Debtors Prison on this work. Next slide, please. We are also continuing our advocacy for sentencing reform. Another driver of Delaware's large prison population is that there is essentially no functioning mechanism to release an incarcerated person prior to the expiration of their sentence, other than some minor shortening due to earning good time. And there's no robust mechanism for early release from prison on compassionate or other grounds. As a result, too many people who have demonstrated extraordinary rehabilitation are spending unnecessary years in prison. The General Assembly should prioritize expanding opportunities for sentencing modification and early release. Another component of sentencing reform is to remove all drug crimes from the violent felony list. Currently, drug crimes are treated as a violent crime, even if a particular instance did not actually involve violence. As a result, the sentence for violent felony is higher than if the drug crime was considered a non-violent crime. By removing all drug offenses from the violent felony list, we can move from this failed war on drug policy, which has disproportionately impacted Black and Brown communities, and finally address drug addiction as the public health issue that it is. Next slide, please. Next, we are focusing on probation reform. As Mike stated earlier, this summer, we released a report on Delaware's broken probation system at peoplenotprobation.com. Delaware has the highest rate of probation, and Delaware has the 8th highest rate of probation in the nation. and 10% of the prison population are incarcerated for violations of probation. Many times people are incarcerated for breaking rules of their probation that are not new crimes, like failing to meet with their probation officer, missing curfew, failing urine drug screens. And I say this all to say that in the time of COVID-19, changes such as changing check-ins to by telephone rather than in person, and a reduction in incarcerating people for technical violations may have played a big role in reducing the number of people on probation. So in the last 10 to 11 months, the probation population has reduced by about 3,100 people. So we don't have to go back. And it's important that we continue policing and probation policies made in response to COVID-19 that have changed the system for the better. Furthermore, probation should be eliminated for minor convictions. Probation terms should be customized to meet individual needs and limited to 1 year. And finally, people should not be returning back to jail or prison for rule violations. Next slide, please. Our next priority is police accountability and transparency. Currently, Delaware's law mandates that police misconduct and discipline be investigated internally and by other police officers. Moreover, those records are kept private, so no one can request access about misconduct or disciplinary measures for their own local police department or even the state police. The solution is to make changes to the Delaware Code to make police misconduct records public, as well as allowing for investigations by external bodies like civilian review boards and community members. Next slide, please. Our fifth priority is the Clean Slate Act. And with this act, we are expanding on our work from 2019 when we advocated and successfully saw the passage of the Adult Expungement Reform Act. Prior to the passage of that bill, there was no option for adult expungement for any conviction on a person's record without first obtaining a pardon. So the process was very lengthy. It was a tremendous success, that bill was, but barriers still remain for folks who are trying to remove convictions from their records. So for example, they have to determine if they're eligible. What path do they have to take to have that conviction removed? They have to get a background check, have their fingerprints taken, pay to actually file the paperwork. So the solution to eliminate those barriers is to create an automatic expungement process where someone doesn't have to actually initiate that expungement. Next slide, please. And finally, we are actively in the midst and calling for action for the Public Health Credit Bill, also known as House Bill 37. Incarcerated people have been vulnerable to catastrophic effects of COVID-19, and we knew that that would happen at the start of the pandemic and have been advocating for safety measures since then. Communal living makes it very difficult for the facilities to practice recommended strategies such as social distancing and keeping people safe. Unfortunately, 12 incarcerated people have died due to COVID-19. Over 1,800 incarcerated people and over 600 correctional staff have tested positive for COVID-19. And so tonight, I'm asking for our viewers to support HB 37, which will allow incarcerated people to earn up to 1 year off of their sentence for time that they spent incarcerated during a public health crisis. This will allow for an orderly release of people, and it will also allow for safer conditions in the facilities for the workers and the residents that remain within them. So that concludes my presentation on our 2021 Smart Justice policies. Next, Melissa Bryson, our Development Director, will share with you how you can help us take on this fight.
Thanks, Javon. So I'm Melissa Bryson, the Development Director here at ACLU of Delaware. And first I want to start by saying thank you to all of our ACLU supporters out here tonight. It is your gifts and your actions that help us to think big and to create the legislative plans that you all just heard from my incredible coworkers. Thank you for being there to ensure that we can do all of this great work. If you are not currently an ACLU member, tonight I encourage you to take that step. I truly believe that there is no more important time to be a card-carrying member of the ACLU. With all of the work that needs to be done nationwide and the local legislative priorities that we have set forward for 2021, we need your support. So if you're ready to become a member tonight, I'm asking you to visit our website at www.aclu-de.org, hover over the donate button, click join, and it's there that you can make a one-time gift or become one of our cherished monthly donors. Becoming a monthly donor is an incredible way to support the ACLU of Delaware. By making that pledge to support us monthly, you're enabling us to be ready for the unexpected, and you're allowing us to plan for the very important stuff that we know needs to get done right here in our state of Delaware. If you ever have any questions about how to give or why to give, feel free to contact me. We can email, we can get on the phone. I'll even take a Zoom coffee with you and we can talk about, you know, the great things that we're doing here in the state of Delaware and how you can be a part of it. So thank you again for your support, and I look forward to working alongside all of you in 2021. And I'm going to hand it back to Mike in case we have any questions that have come through on the chat.
Thanks so much, Melissa. And yeah, I can speak from first-person experience. Having Zoom coffee with Melissa is actually a very enjoyable experience. And you know, we appreciate all of you who do the monthly donations to ACLU. You know, I think about, especially in pandemic life, I save a lot of money not doing the real person coffees. And so, you know, $10 a month, you barely miss it. And it means a lot for us to be able to do our lobbying and legislative work. We have a couple questions right now, but a couple things. So first, the first question I saw was from Clara, and Clara was wondering if she can get a copy of the PowerPoint. And yes, so you can contact our communications director, Morgan Keller. And by the way, we love you, Morgan. Thank you for orchestrating all of this. But you can email Morgan Keller at mkeller@aclu-de.org. We will also post the PowerPoint on our website, so you can download it there after this event as well. Second question I had, so Dustin asked for you, Dwayne. He said, you know, a lot of people just don't know about the deadlines for registration, and that's a big problem. But he was also sort of upset about the fact that you can't really change your party affiliation. Are there any efforts to change that, or would the same-day registration bill affect that at all?
That's a great point, Dustin, and something we'll certainly keep looking at. You know, one of the things that we're keeping as a priority is that we keep the same standards for all voters when they register. So if a same-day registrant can register as a member of a political party on election day, then that should be the same for all other voters. And so we're looking at consistency in the Delaware Code to make sure that the same requirements regarding identification and requiring deadlines is consistent throughout our legislation. So I agree, these deadlines are arbitrary, hard to keep up with. We just need to have one deadline for everybody to know, and that's election day. And everybody who shows up on election day should be allowed to vote. Mike?
Let's make it as easy as possible to cast your ballot. I also saw a comment in the section, maybe for you to talk a little bit about, Javon. Somebody, Kobe, posted that he hopes that we can repeal and address that law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights. Javon, I hear a lot about Leo Board, but can you talk a little bit about why it's such a problem for police accountability here in Delaware?
Yes, absolutely. So the reason why it's a major problem is because police have extraordinary powers. They have the right to, or at least the power, they have the power to take someone's liberties away, so incarcerate them, question them, and they also sometimes have the power to take someone's life. And when it is done in a way that it is a wrongful death, there's no accountability there. Not only is there no accountability, the people don't know what that investigation looked like. We don't know what happened in the incident. Like, it just kind of, a couple years pass and like the families remember it, but in the media, it kind of goes away. So we want to know, when they say there's bad apples and police officers, we want to know who those bad apples are. We want to know who we're giving these powers to in our community. So the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, it basically keeps all those records public. So we want to make changes that will publicize that information so that we can collect data about police misconduct and discipline. And on one end, it will give the community a better chance to know what's going on in the police departments. But it's also a good thing for police departments because they can say, hey, we actually don't, like, we've shown you these records, we actually don't have this issue. So that's why the, making those changes to the code to increase transparency and accountability is so important.
Thank you, Javon. Shannon, I had a question for you. So ombudsperson is a mouthful, isn't it? And not everyone might know what an ombudsperson actually does. So what could the office actually do to help ensure justice and equity in our public schools?
Great question, Mike. So it's not anything new. It would be new to Delaware, of course, but there are states that have had these offices established for many, many years. And so, and the length of what they actually can do varies, or not the length, but exactly the specifications of what they actually can do varies. In Delaware, we're really hoping that we have an independent organization that can really assist families, because right now we get calls in ACLU on a regular basis saying that students were being suspended and they felt like their rights were violated, or that there wasn't due process. And families are left kind of floundering, or students have to go to these expulsion hearings and it's just their family members. They don't really understand all the codes of conduct. There's a lot of paperwork that's done that they may not necessarily understand. And so this office would help to provide representation to those families as well. In addition, we want to not just be reactive, we want to be proactive, right? So how an office can actually help to support providing advocacy training, understanding what is special education and what are the rights under that, because the IDA law is really quite powerful and strong. A lot of families don't utilize it because they don't know the powers that they already have. So the office can help to provide that additional assistance of resources to families all across the state. At least that's our hope.
Wow. So, of course, the landmark settlement is going to put more dollars into public schooling here in Delaware, but also maybe have some accountability, some path to restorative justice in our schools through this ombudsperson's office. So, boy, even though it's a mouthful, I hope I get to say it a lot more in 2021 and 2022. Yeah, so you can see we have an amazing set of priorities, and we have a great team here at the ACLU of Delaware who is working every single day to talk to our elected officials at Legislative Hall, work locally to organize, do amazing communications work to tell our story. And again, we can't do this work without you. And so if you're not already a member of the ACLU, you got to become a member. If you're not already doing the monthly donations, do that now. $10 a month. Again, most of us are making that back right now in all the coffee meetings we're not doing. But we also just don't need your financial support. We need your person support. And we need you to be part of our squad asking for our rights and justice and equity in Ledge Hall. And so if you're interested in becoming active with the ACLU, if you're not already on our action alert list, sign up for that on our website. If you're interested specifically in the smart justice work, we have smart justice working groups throughout the state in Newcastle, Sussex, and Kent County. And so you can become active locally as well. Last thing I want to mention, so Javon, I think you had one more screen to share with folks, or one more thing that you wanted to say, so I'm going to turn it on over to Javon.
Yes, the only final comment that I'd like to say tonight is we know that folks who are viewing us right now are following us on Facebook, but Follow us to stay connected on our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and our other links that are listed here to stay up to date on, how you can help us move these issues forward.
We want to hear from you. And again, we can only do our work because of you all. So please be with us in this fight. We are so excited for everything that we can do in 2021. I know it feels like the world is a little bit on fire right now, but we can actually move the ball forward and ensure better education equity, better access to the ballot, and more justice in our justice system together. So thank you all for being here tonight. And please be in touch because we need you in this fight. Thanks, everyone. Bye.